store and being here. It's great.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming, everybody.
Well, my book's been out for a while, and David's is new, so I think we need to start talking about what you.
Okay, before we get into the drug stories that we all know, that's what we all want.
Yeah, and we will, open it to Q&A. So look at some good questions for us, because you never know when you do that. So give us a good one. So congratulations on the launch of your book.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. And I know a lot of people probably already read, because I did an interview with David in the Wall Street Journal that just ran a couple of days ago.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome. But I'm sure that people already, but I still need to start where I started there, because I just think the format that you arrived at here is so interesting. And maybe it's only interesting to me as a writer, because you're always thinking of how are you going to dive in, how are you going to tell the story, especially one as complex as the Grateful Dead, which is, as we know, 50 years, or 30 very active years, and so many different people coming in and out. So could you just talk a little bit about how and why you came up with that structure?
Sure. The book is structured in a way that every chapter is about one particular day or small group of days in your story. And the way I decided to do that was, well, basically, when you decide to write a book about the Grateful Dead, given how much has been written about them, and continues to be written about them, you kind of have to wonder, well, what can I bring new to this story? And ever since my first book about the Buckleys, I try to approach my books almost as if as nonfiction books, as if they were novels. So I do all this kind of research and reporting, and gathering together documents and whatnot. And then I try to lay it out there like it's a novel, and with scenes and stories and characters. And when I had the idea to do a book on the Dead, I immediately flashed back to that approach. And I thought, well, no one's done that before. The books on them have mostly been kind of very, there were terrific books on them, and they're very kind of encyclopedic in a way. And I thought, if any story lent itself to scenes and settings and colorful characters over 50 years, it's this one. And I should also give a shout out to my wife Maggie, she's here somewhere, because when I first mentioned the idea to her that I wanted to do this book, I said, well, if I finish it in time, it'll come out in time for the 50th anniversary. And she said, oh, well, 50 years, 50 days. And I was like, oh, I was overwhelmed with that idea, doing 50 chapters, but it also put the idea in my head, and kind of sort of whittled it down.
It also gives it a structure, I think, that's appropriate, which is a little bit kaleidoscopic.
Right.
Because it's not, when I first started reading it, I was anticipating that each day would stay more directly with that day, but you really use them as a way to bore in to a lot more, and to branch out all over the place in ways that still make sense and come back to it. But you were able to cover a lot more than 50 days.
I do, yes.
I think it's important to know.
Right, yes, I should just say that, yes. Not like then they went to the bathroom at 3 o'clock. There's some of that. I wanted to make each day kind of representative of a particular era in their saga, and so I wanted to put all these events kind of in context. So, there's one chapter, they had a real low point in the early 80s when actually Jerry was not in great shape, and I had access to all these notes of a recording session, but they tried to make a record that didn't even come out. They didn't finish it. So I used that day and took you through that period, and kind of went back and forth to use that as an example of them kind of at their low point. Actually, that section has one of my favorite little quotes in it, which is one of the people I interviewed was Joan Baez, who during this period dated their drummer, one of the drummers, Mickey Hart. I'd never read an interview with her about this. It's mentioned briefly, and so I thought, I wonder if she'd talk about it. And she would, and she did. So, and she hadn't thought about it in like 30 years, but and at one point she's during this period when things were not so great in the band. She actually tried making a record with the Grateful Dead, because she said, why not? So they were recording together, and it just wasn't happening either, not even with her. And at one point she's in the studio and watching Jerry sitting there, he's like really trying to come up with a part, and the was just playing for hours trying to come up, and after a while she was starting to feel all woozy and everything. And that's when she asked Mickey, like, what's going on? He said, you're experiencing a contact low. she still remembers that.
Yeah.
Really good.
Yeah, and I thought that was I really liked that chapter in the book. I thought that was great. And it is interesting. It brings up, I think, one similarity in our books in a way is that we both covered eras pretty extensively that haven't been covered so much before. I mean, similar time frame for me, the 90s and the 2000s of the Allman Brothers,
Right.
After the resurrection in 1989, and for you, really most of the 80s and the 90s, which I think is an era that hasn't been taken too seriously in other Grateful Dead books, and of course that's when they were most popular, and so many people, that's when they had their greatest exposure to them. And I think that there's been a dissatisfaction from some people in reading other books where they want to read about these things that they saw and that they experienced and what was going on, and there's all these rumors and thoughts and people have ideas, but so I mean, for me that came about mostly because I did see that as something that hadn't been covered, but it was my era. I mean, it's when I was around from after the Allman Brothers regrouped in '89 on. I was around a lot, increasingly so, and so I thought it would be remiss for me not to, but I also thought it was interesting and hadn't been covered as much. And I was just wondering what your motivation was. Was it similar? Did you see it as a whole that should be filled in, or?
I did. I mean, I do feel like I said, there have been a lot of great books on the band, but they tend to really kind of go in depth up until about 1980, and then it sort of skips through some of those periods. And I do think that was a fascinating period for the Dead, and especially the 80s into the 90s. It was when they had their one big hit, Touch of Grey, and that really changed their universe in so many ways, because all of a sudden there were all these people coming to their shows, tons more people, and the repercussions of that on them, and the way they did business, and even Jerry to some degree. And I've met so many Deadheads who discovered them with Touch of Grey, and even though older Deadheads were dismissive of them, called them touchheads and everything, they really love that period. Like no matter when. It's interesting to talk to Deadheads or just people like the Grateful Dead, how much they connect to the band when they first heard them. So you talk to original fans who heard them in the 60s and they love the Pigpen. And you talk to people who discovered them in the 70s, like me, and you like that Europe 72, Keith Godchild period. But then you meet guys who were kids at the time who discovered them with Touch of Grey. And for them, that lineup, that's the real Grateful Dead. The Brent Midland era is the only era they love. So I thought, you have to pay respect to them too, what they want to know about that era.
Did you have, one thing I found challenging to some extent was, my goal when I started writing this book really was I wanted to write the definitive book on the Allman Brothers. So I wanted it to be the one. And so in order to do that, I had to start at the beginning or before the beginning. Of course I had to write extensively about Browne, without whom the whole thing never would have existed, and whose presence animated it really until the end, 42 years after he died. But at the same time, I didn't want to get bogged down in stuff that had already been covered. I wanted to make sure I could offer a different perspective on things, or not, or so it was like a fine line, because I didn't want to leave holes, but I also didn't want to retread ground that had been tread. And I'm just wondering if you found similar challenges, especially again in the early days. I mean, it's similar in the sense that the first 5 to 7 years of the Grateful Dead has probably been pretty well documented.
Right. Well, that was the advantage to me, anyway, in putting it together of my approach. That by just picking certain, days and eras, I could hopefully just focus in on certain things from certain periods that haven't been covered extensively, and kind of talk about their past and their family history and backgrounds, but not just, again, put that in the context of a bigger picture in each chapter. And instead of, I guess a good example of that would be Jerry Garcia's one of his first girlfriends. He had many, but one of his first had been interviewed in some of the other books. Her name is Barbara Meyer. Her name is now Bridget. She was so distraught over breaking up with Jerry in the 90s. That she had to change her name. that's a whole other story. But you know, we were talking, and she mentioned this whole story about the night of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and how on that one night, that weekend in October of '62, was a Saturday night, and everybody thought, oh, well, things are going to go haywire, and we could be in a nuclear war. And she and Jerry, he was 20, she was 17, went up on this little hill near Palo Alto and just started singing the folk songs and waiting for the world to end. And it didn't, obviously, but you know, I've never heard that before. You know, I looked in all these other books and I never heard that. And so I made that one of the focuses of that period because I thought, and the reason I did that was because I think one of the things you learn about Jerry is that he was kind of a fatalist, and there were so many things in his life, were moments in his life where his life kind of changed in a heartbeat. His father drowned real quickly when he was really young. Jerry was in a car accident with one of his best friends when he was a teenager, and that guy died instantly. And so there were these things constant in Jerry's life that made him think that the world could change, things could change on a dime, and you might as well just live for the moment. And I really think that infused this whole sensibility. So the reason, I think the Cuban Missile Crisis moment was one of those moments where he just thought, you know, okay, well, you know, I survived this, but maybe there's something else, and we might as well just not plan too much in the future.
And she's a really interesting character. she was in his life in return, yeah. And it, you know, points out that way that Jerry seemed to always have a couple of wives at a time, more or less, which is another thing Allman Brothers grateful they have in common. And you know, during the
not just the two drummers.
Yeah,
that's not the only.
Yeah, but in my deep dive through the Allman Brothers, you know, you start to just think about how dysfunctional they were as an organization and as people at various times. But then you start reading about the Grateful Dead, who kind of make the Allman Brothers look like they're pretty competent at life. It's really pretty astounding, actually. But, I mean, what both of them accomplished, honestly, with all the personal foibles.
Well, I'm curious, in your experience, one of the things I learned in talking to all these people from the dead world now, survivors and employees, is it's still very much a family, like it was way back in the day, even if these people don't see each other, and they're happy to like gossip and badmouth about each other to someone like me constantly, but if an outsider badmouths them, they all, you know, they circle the wagons, and you know, there's still that family thing. Is that the same dynamic in the Allman Brothers?
Yeah, I think it is more or less. I think it is more or less. I think that from what I know about the Dead, which is there was always a little bit more of a tension there to some extent because of the different pulls on Jerry, and there was all this tension between the Grateful Dead and the Jerry Garcia Band. And, you know, when I interviewed Bill Kurtzman recently, or actually, I mentioned earlier, I'm a little confused with some of my Grateful Dead facts as to where they came from, because in very close succession, I read So Many Roads, I read Bill's book, I reread Dark Star, the Garcia oral history, and I interviewed Bill, and I reread a bunch of other. Anyhow, I kind of forget what came from where with my Grateful Dead facts, but and I have completely lost my train of thought.
We were talking about the family dynamic kind of thing.
Well, one of the things Bill says in his book was, I think he was talking about when, it's either when Brent was hired or when Vince was hired. I have no idea why we didn't hire Merle Saunders. You know, he came and played with us, and it was great, and I loved him, we all loved him, and I don't know why he wasn't the guy. But then right after that, I reread Dark Star, which I hadn't read probably since it came out, and Merle Saunders is very open in there about how he felt this huge hostility from the Grateful Dead world because they felt he was pulling him away from the band. And so, and it was just interesting. Again, I'm sure that Bill was insulated from that, and he may not have been the person who was directing hostility. He had no idea that was happening. So it's all kind of Byzantine. So one person's hostility towards someone else isn't necessarily reflective. So, and I don't know, you know, in Merle Saunders' case, just as one example, that might have been directed from one person, or it may have been organizational. But that was a long, convoluted answer. In short, yes.
It's true. I mean, you bring up that point of there was that tugging on Jerry was started, in the '70s, and it continued right up until the end. And anyone who would try to pull him away from the mothership, from all these side projects, was really, blackballed almost in the organization because their overhead was huge. I mean, I interviewed one of their business managers, and by the mid '90s, by the time Jerry died, their monthly overhead was $750,000 a month, for staff and insurance and office rent and all that stuff. It's a huge amount of money. And Jerry, if they went off the road, or if they put Jerry in rehab, which never really happened, and they went off the road, they would lose that. They wouldn't be able to make money to pay those bills. So imagine the stress on that guy.
Well, one thing that I think is kind of interesting in retrospect, and I don't think I realized it at the time, I think, and I know that not everyone will agree, but in the last few years that Jerry's playing with the Grateful Dead was awful for the most part. I mean, I'm a guitarist. I think I know what's happening. Anyhow, so you would listen to that and think, well, this guy's losing it. He can't play anymore. He's falling apart. But if you listen to him in the Garcia Band and some other things he's played with in similar eras, I'm not going to say it was his best playing, but it's a lot better. It's not the sound of someone physically unable to play at all. And so that just makes me now think about, well, what was really going on? I mean, he couldn't play in the Grateful Dead because of whatever, the pressure was too great and too strong.
Yeah, and you had all the Dead Camp and the side project camp all saying, no, he took more drugs with you. No, he took more drugs with you.
Yeah.
Kind of stuff I was not able to prove,
Right.
Give me a list of how much you gave him. It's a lot of accusations. So.
Yeah, and it's, that's one of those things, all the things you gather up that you can't put in the book. But, I spent a lot of time the Allman Brothers have a museum in Macon, Georgia, the big house, which was their group house just for a couple of years, and is now a museum, really, thanks to the efforts of Kirk West, who was their historian and archivist and a great photographer. Interesting character in his own.
Is there a copy of the Greg and Cher album in the museum?
Yeah, there is. Yeah, it's in a frame. You have to search for it. You have to search for it. I can show you. It's kind of in the closet. But they have this incredible archives there, and I was able to spend hours going through it, which was just a tremendous asset to me. And one of the things I found in there that nobody really knew was there was a sheet of paper that was totaling up cocaine debts. It was marked like, Greg 2, Dickie 1, and money totals. And I couldn't figure out exactly where it came from, but I knew who it was by someone in the management.
I went through the Grateful Dead archives, which are in the University of California, Santa Cruz. There was nothing quite like that.
Well, there might be. I mean, it was. I just stumbled on it. But the Grateful Dead, the Allman Brothers. It's amazing that archive exists, and that's really due to the efforts of this one person, Kirk. The Grateful Dead is a little different in that regard. I mean, there are these incredible academic approaches and studies, and people have websites dedicated to finding.
Corey Arnold.
Yeah, and it's really an amazing world. It's totally unique, and there's really nothing like that. I mean, there's a fraction of it in the Allman. There's probably more of that in the Allman Brothers than there is normal in the rest of the world, but it's a smidgen of what there is.
Last November there was a whole Grateful Dead conference, 3 or 4 days. Let's see, 1, 2, 3. I think it was 3 or 4. At San Jose University, and every day there were half a dozen panels at least, mostly industry. There were some deadheads and fans and a lot of academics pouring over every little bit of minutia, or each one dedicated to one subject, and it was kind of amazing. And I don't think there are that many. I mean, there are conventions or Beatle conventions and things, but not too many conferences that go on for days for really to one band. I can remember.
And
I even share.
and it's just so interesting because I mean, it's so second nature now that all exists for the Grateful Dead, because we know that it does. But it's pretty counterintuitive if you think about their origins, that it would end up being something so carefully analyzed and studied and counted. And it's just interesting because my brain doesn't work that way. I mean, I love baseball. Okay, I can't remember offhand if much of my favorite baseball players are left-handed or right-handed hitters. I just don't. I can't tell you offhand the statistics of my favorite players or what their best years were. I just don't. And there's that element of statistical knowledge and obsession that permeates baseball, really permeates part of the Grateful Dead world. And it's just interesting to me. I never heard, if I'm at a show, I'm enjoying it, and if I hear a great St. Stevens, I'm never thinking, it's the best one since 7276. I mean, I'm kind of making fun of it, but I'm kind of not, because it is foreign to me, but it is also a really valid thing. That's really an important part of that world.
It is, and the bond that they had with their audience like that is kind of phenomenal. And even I even saw it in those archives. Actually, I came across. Actually, it wasn't the archives. It was a friend of theirs who had lent me a copy of a letter that Jerry wrote to a fan in 1967. Before they finished making their first record, they weren't really anybody, and some fan wrote in, and Jerry wrote him back this long letter, dissecting the band, who each guy was and what they played, and mailing it to this guy, back to this guy. And then you'd also in the archives find these newsletters that they would send out in the early 70s. You'd sign up for it, and you get this thing in the mail, every month or whatever it was, periodically, I would say, and with written by somebody who worked for them, but in their voice, like, hey, here's what we're doing, we're just going to do shows, we just finished making this record, hey, we're just starting a record company, and you get this, if you were a Deadhead and you signed up, you'd get this thing in your mailbox, which, and it was kind of early tweets, early social media, and they really, it was sort of, calculated it was, but the way they established that connection with their audience, so nobody was doing that back then,
Right. Well, the mail order ticket thing was ingenious and sort of archaic by the time they finished, but they resurrected it again, which is sort of amazing.
I have a question about for you, Allman, which is in your book, Greg Allman disses the Dead. Just like Dickie Betts seems like he's a fan,
right?
But Greg is this very dismissive thing. I never got it or whatever it was. And what is that about?
Well, I think there's two levels to it. The first level is that Greg was never that interested in the whole jamming aspect of the Allman Brothers. The area in which they're most similar to the Grateful Dead really is an area that Greg had to be dragged into. Greg never would have been in a jamming band like that had he not been Dwayne's brother who brought him along. I think Greg's real. If you listen to some of Greg's great songs like Midnight Rider and Melissa, and as we were talking earlier, Greg loved Tim Buckley, Greg loves Jackson Browne. Greg's sort of vision of himself was more some weird hybrid of Bobby Bland and Jackson Browne, where he would write songs like Jackson Browne and sing them like Bobby Bland. And he wasn't really interested in all the solos and improvisation, but that came from everyone else, especially from his perspective, from Dwayne. And so I don't think he ever really cared for that world too much, although he sat in with the Dead and there were really great jams with him. I think more of it is, in 75, 76, when Greg had his problems and was ostracized by everyone, including his bandmates, for testifying against their roadie. He heard that Jerry called him a snitch on stage. It's not clear, and I really tried hard to prove whether or not Jerry ever did say that. It's really nobody knows. So the basic answer is that there's no way to know if Jerry called Greg a snitch on stage, but Greg believes that Jerry called him a snitch for sure. And so I don't think Greg ever really liked him, but after that, he just decided he hated them. Butch Trucks is also pretty dismissive of the Grateful Dead. Dickie Betts loves them. He loves Jerry's playing, loves Jerry's playing. Browne, I think it's evident that he did by the interest he had in playing with them. And Barry Oakley was definitely out and out a fan. And you know, we were talking with Jesse earlier. I mean, Barry sometimes wore dead shirts on stage, and you know, Kreutzmann says in his book, he mentions that the 11, how he came up with that time signature, and then not long after the Allman Brothers came out with Whipping Post, which is in a similar time signature, he sort of says, I've always wondered about that. And Barry Oakley wrote that intro. Barry was I mean, if anyone would have heard that immediately and put it to use, it was him. And I told that to Bill when I interviewed him recently. He was really happy. He was really pleased. I'm surprised he didn't ever make any effort to track that down. I'm not the only person who could have told him that. But you know, I think there's a lot of.
Here's the other big difference between the two bands, which is I interviewed when the promoter of Watkins Glen, which not everybody remembers, but in 1973 it was this huge. It was bigger than Woodstock. It was a one-day festival. Well, it turned into a two-day festival, but it was the Allman Brothers Band, the band, just upstate here at a racetrack. And this being 1973, the promoter said they had a backstage trail